So where does she really fall in with the whole thing of gun control?
Well, you can see that over the years she's been sort of adapting to circumstances, because back when she ran for the Senate in 99, 2000 or so, she was in favor of registering guns, having a national registration plan and national licensing. Every time you transferred at least handguns under the legislation that she was talking about, you would have to be a record of it. So the government would know where the guns were at any given time, and you'd need permission before you bought one. She no longer supports that, at least as of 2008, when she was running for president.
Right.
So
gotta modify
different demographic. Although, you know, there are people in upstate New York who would object to that position, I'm sure,
yes.
But not around New York City so much. So at that time, she said she no longer supported that plan, and she believed in balancing Second Amendment rights with common sense gun control legislation, that sort of thing, right?
Right.
So that's probably the position she's going to try to strike during this campaign. The problem is when you get down to specifics about what she means by common sense gun control legislation, people won't necessarily think that it's common sense.
Right.
And you know, one of the things that she's been calling for consistently is bringing back an assault weapon ban and making it stricter.
Oh, that language.
Yes, and I think the language does fool a lot of people, and she in her own rhetoric talks about automatic weapons and machine guns, which is incorrect.
Yes.
I mean, these weapons are not the ones that are being used in these mass shootings. They're all semi-automatic guns. The things that they...
But they're black and they look shooty, Jacob.
Yes, I mean, the things that they latch onto when they're trying to describe what an assault weapon is really have very little to do with the capabilities of the gun. So she'll try that. That, you know, has not been very successful, and if they try to narrow the definition, or rather widen the definition further, what they're going to end up doing is saying if it accepts a detachable magazine, and it has one of these other features that we don't like, a folding stock, for example, or a barrel shroud, then it's right out, even though that doesn't really make any sense.
Right.
So she'll try that. She also talks about improving the background check system. Now, I think that does poll pretty well until you get down to the details of what that really means. That first of all, for almost all of these mass shooters had no disqualifying criminal or psychiatric records. Typically, they
weren't followed up on if they had them.
Well, there are a couple of rare cases where they had some kind of record that, if had it been known, might have stopped them from buying a gun. But in the vast majority of cases, it's not the case. That if you had better background checks or consistent background checks, like if the murderer in Connecticut, in Newtown, had to buy the gun himself instead of getting it from his mother, he would have passed the background check. Yeah. So it's not like having better background checks in that sense would have helped. You can start to crack down on based on the current criteria, but the current criteria are bad, because what they do is disqualify, for example, anyone with a felony record, which includes lots of people who were never violent.
Right, nonviolent offenders,
drug offenders, for example. Right, and it really doesn't make any sense. It's like, what is the connection between committing a nonviolent crime and not being able to own a gun? You lose your Second Amendment rights forever based on that felony. Well, you could get more serious about enforcing that bar. But I think a lot of innocent people would be denied their constitutional rights if they did that. You could get more serious about things like if you are a recent user of a controlled substance and it was unlawful use. So that means not just people who smoke pot from time to time, but people who use somebody else's prescription.
Right.
If you ever used, you know, a Vicodin that was prescribed for a relative, that makes you an illegal user of a controlled substance.
And she hasn't gotten into
Under
any of
federal
those.
law, you are not allowed to own a gun.
Right.
Now, so she's saying, let's enforce these rules, and I think that's a terrible idea. You know, first of all, it becomes very invasive trying to determine, you know, who exactly is an unlawful user of an illegal substance, but also it is disqualifying people based on criteria that make no sense, that are not fair, and that I would argue are unconstitutional.
And I've seen her use a lot of, getting to some of the background checks, I've seen her use a lot of the Bloomberg lobby group's language, expanding background checks. And well, it's not like in the instance of Jared Loughner in Tucson. I mean, he had been forcibly removed from campus, and they said he could not go back unless he had a doctor's note clearing him, saying that he was fit to be back on campus because he'd been threatening students. I know you know the story. They had also given Dupnick's office there in Pima County a heads up as to the community college security did. Nothing was ever done. We have these protocols in place, but what good do they do, and why do we have to be penalized with increased punitive background checks when you have these policies in place that aren't followed? I don't think anyone's ever asked her that.
Well, I think that the reason it appeals to people is it sounds like you're doing something.
Right.
When in fact,
scratching the itch.
The policies that she's proposing would not do anything about that sort of situation.